Hey everyone, so we're carrying on with the same note package as before. Um, you know, yesterday we did sampling, right? We talked about different sampling techniques, right? Today we're going to talk about bias in surveys. So a statistical bias is any factor that can favor certain outcomes or responses. There's different kinds, and you always have to consider if you're including a bias when you're making a survey. Um, you've probably taken a survey that already has bias in it. A lot of surveys from companies will intentionally include bias because they want to collect data that looks a certain way. But in reality, if you're paying attention to this, you can clearly see when something um, is biased. So it happens in the world. You'll see it. Hopefully, after you um, listen to this lesson and you try a couple of these questions, the goal is for you to look at information that you're given, like data. And the first question you should be asking yourself is, where did they get this information? How did they collect it? What were the questions that they asked? Because people will spout statistics like this many people prefer this over this, but you don't know what questions they asked in order to get that answer. So the phrasing of the question, who they ask, how they ask, all plays a factor into the responses they're going to get and how the data is going to look or how they can manipulate the data. So, corporations, companies, they're not out to be transparent and honest. They're out to look good because they want your money. And you have to be careful how they present data. So there's different responses or different biases, I should say. The first one's gonna be a response bias. This is basically when the problem is the response you're getting. So you get a response, but the problem is the truthfulness behind this response. Okay, a lot of people won't ask or answer surveys honestly, even if they're anonymous, sometimes they don't ask them honestly, or they could just want to be funny and lie on purpose, right? Lie to be funny or the lie to avoid embarrassment. There's lots of reasons. So, for example, a teacher asks a grade 12 boys phys ed class who watches Teletubbies. Well, odds are the people who are going to raise their hand and be like, I watch Teletubbies, they're being funny, like, they're joking around. So you're going to get all this like positive data that's incorrect, or potentially maybe no there are any jokesters in class, but something makes me think that if there's actually someone who still watches the Teletubbies, they're not going to raise their hand and be like, honestly, I still watch the Teletubbies, right? So here you're putting yourself in a situation where the answers you get from your audience or from your sample size could be wrong. So you got to be very careful and watch out for response bias. Sampling bias, this occurs when the people you're actually asking don't reflect the population that you're trying to assess, right? So in this example, a public opinion poll asks 100 high school students if most workplaces have inadequate health benefit packages. Well, high school students, for the most part, don't work full-time jobs that provide health benefit packages. So you're asking a sample of the population that doesn't really represent the population as a whole. Like high school students are not the best representation of your average worker. They're usually part-time. This is a bad thing. It's just the truth. Like you're usually part-time, minimum wage job, entry level. Like I had one. Most people start with entry level jobs. It's not a bad thing, but you can't ask a question about um, health benefit packages to people who don't qualify for them, right? Because everyone's gonna be like, well, I don't get health benefits, so it must be bad, it must be bad. So you could just say, the results of the survey are gonna be like, well, all high school students think that, this is wrong, but maybe they don't say that. Maybe just say we surveyed 100 people, right? So if they're not clear about who their sample is, they could skew this and make it seem like people don't like their healthcare packages. When in reality, they just asked people who didn't have them who legitimately shouldn't have them, potentially. So the sample has to actually represent the population you're talking about. Now, if they make it very clear they're talking about 100 high school students, then that's fine. But that would have to be very clear. Okay? A non-response bias, okay? Non-response, no response, okay? This is when people are underrepresented because they choose not to participate. So in this example here, a phone survey, telephone survey makes phone calls at 11 a.m. asking people if they're currently happy in their present job. Well, most jobs are 9 to 5, and most lunch hours are from like 12 to 1 or from 11:30 to 12:30. It's like phoning people at 11 in the morning and asking them if they like their job. Unless you're phoning their work phone, you're probably not going to get a hold of very many of them. So here you have all the people who are currently unemployed potentially, or maybe they're working night shifts or shift work, but you're missing a huge chunk of the population because they're just not going to answer the phone because they're literally at work. So here you could see that you have a non-response bias, like you get no responses from a large section of the population that is at work during that time. Measurement bias, okay, this occurs when the sampling technique, right, is affecting the variable that's trying to measure. So this bias occurs when survey questions are asked poorly. Okay, basically we're saying we can't lead a person to a specific answer. So this is one example. We asked, the proposed nuclear power plant will reduce the number of jobs and economic activity in and around your community. Are you in favor of this forward? Sorry, it will produce a number of jobs and economic activity around your community. Are you in favor of this forward-thinking initiative? So this may seem like it's just a fair question, but you got to think about um, specifically the last portion of this. Okay. Are you in favor of this forward-thinking initiative? So in favor, right? Already is saying it's not asking what do you think. It's saying like, are you in favor? So you're already pushing towards it being favorable, right? Especially this is blatant forward-thinking initiative. So clearly they're putting in your mind that this is a good thing. That this nuclear power plant is a forward-thinking initiative, right? If they just wanted your opinion, they would just say, "What do you think about the new power plant?" But the fact that they're mentioning an upside of the power plant, right? Then they're saying using the word favor, like favorable. Then they're calling it a forward-thinking initiative. So they're phrasing this entire thing in a positive light, right? They're praising this entire thing as though it's already positive. So people are more likely to agree. Like you're gonna say no, I don't want jobs and economic activity. That doesn't make any sense, right? So that's one example. Another example here, right? What's your favorite sport? Hockey, basketball, baseball, soccer. Well, what if you don't like any of these sports? Now you're in a situation where you can't actually choose the sports. You're stuck choosing one of these four sports. So that means that you maybe like cricket the most, right? Or football. Well, that's not an option, right? So you have to choose one of these four, which means that one of these four is getting a vote that it probably shouldn't get because it's not actually the favorite sport of you. Okay? So take a look at these different questions, right? Talk about how this could be a response bias issue, okay, a sampling bias issue, okay? Um, and yeah, just think about it, see if you can find the flaw, and then if you're having any trouble, make sure you reach out to me.